So I will be doing today's sharing. After reading one whole week about stopped, worried, this uh, depressions, today's Being Jesus is talking about facing fear. I enjoyed the sharing by Brother Tree last 2 days. So I won't go into some of the I would say practical aspect of it because I will not say I am a expert in this. So my sharing will be very simple. Later on you will find out. Okay, it will be based on two very famous Sunday schools story, and then let's see how we can draw application from it. And even as I read today's Being with Jesus, the first sentence strikes me because if you can open up your Being Jesus, the first sentence said like this: fear happens when we face the unknown and sometimes the known. Fear happens when we face the unknown and sometimes the known. So it's quite obvious sometimes, or most of the time, we are fearing of something which we are not sure of. But there are times we are fear of the known. And today I'm going to just talk about, as I said earlier, two characters, a very famous or popular Bible school story, Jonah and Elijah. And what are the lessons and the application that we can draw from these two characters when we talk about facing fear? I'm going to talk about first on Jonah and then talk about Elijah. Several persons in the past, last few days, has talked about Elijah. So I will give a different perspective of Elijah. But first, when we look at Jonah, just a recap to everybody. You can also quickly turn to the book of Jonah. It's only 4 chapters. It's quite easy to read. So a little bit of background that, of course, he is a prophet and God asked him to go to Nineveh. And for very obvious reason, he ran away, the opposite directions of Nineveh, which is in Assyria, to the port of Tarshish. And to cut the story short, he went on the boat, and then he met a storm so severe, and that he asked to be thrown overboard. I put a bracket there. But literally, he asks, he wanted to end his life there. Then God sent a big fish, swallow him, and the angel of God spoke to him when he was in the fish belly, and then after 3 days and 3 nights, the fish swam to the shore of Nineveh, and from there he moved onwards, and then he talked and preached to the people of Nineveh, and they repented. Now this is the nice part, all right? But a lot of the time we neglect there is also, I call it, the sad part. And yet he was very resentful, because if you look at chapter 4 of Jonah, he sat and waited to see what is God going to do to the people of Nineveh, because he was thinking that they didn't deserve a second chance, and he wanted to see how God was going to destroy Nineveh. So this is the sad part. But of course, in every Bible story, there is a good ending. God appeared to him and said that, everybody deserves a second chance. There are 120,000 population in the city of Nineveh. Just talk about Nineveh. How evil, because we need to look at the context. How evil were the people of Nineveh? Okay, now if you go through all the history and archaeology books, they are really, really barbaric. The book of Jonah didn't really say much about how evil or how wicked they are, but I believe in Jonah chapter 1 verse 2, it gives us a glimpse, because it said here, its wickedness has come up before me. The Lord told Jonah. That means they must be very, very bad and wicked. Yeah. The book of Nahum, okay, the whole book of Nahum prophesies about Nineveh in about 600 plus BC. If you look at Nahum chapter 3 verse 1, it says that it is a city full of lies and robbery. And further on in Nahum chapter 3 verse 19, say that nothing can heal you. Your wound is fatal. So this is how evil and how wicked. And when I did some research, in Jonah chapter 3 verse 4, the word overthrown is used. And thematically, it is connected to Sodom and Gomorrah, because in Genesis chapter 19 verse 25, God overthrown Sodom and Gomorrah. So many Bible scholars connect these two places together, meaning that how evil and how wicked Nineveh is. And knowing this background, we need to understand why was Jonah so terrified. He is literally fleeing in fear. Number one, he is fearful of his own safety, because the Ninevites were famous for their atrocities. Again, you can refer to Nahum chapter 2, verse 11 to 12. Okay, they talk about the lions and his cub. And number two reason he was terrified, because it was such a huge responsibility to preach to them. Somebody gave this example. If today God asks you to travel to Syria and preach to the ISIS, would you want to go? If God asks any one of us to travel to Syria or Iraq now and preach to the ISIS and ask them to repent, I believe all of us will be terrified, because it is such a heavy responsibility on us. And third thing, it is what everybody has learned in Sunday school. He was terrified that God will forgive his enemy. Think about that. Think about that. He was terrified. God will forgive his enemy. So as we move fast forward, we know that he was swallowed by the fish. I want everybody now to turn to Jonah chapter 2. Let's read what I call the fish belly prayer by Jonah.
Jonah 2, verse 1. From the inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. Verse 2, he said, In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From the depths of the grave I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hauled me into the deep, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirl about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. Verse 4, I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The gulfing waters threatened me, the deep surrounded me, seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down, the earth beneath barred me in forever, and you brought my life up from the pit, O Lord, my God. Verse 7, when my life was ebbing away, I remember you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. But I, with a song of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. Salvation comes from the Lord.
Amen. So this is the I call it fish belly prayer. Okay. So there are two points that I just want to highlight. That in a sense, when we talk about practical applications, in distress and great troubles, God will answer us. In all kinds of discouragement and fear, God will answer. And the second one, in as what Jonah said, in my version, it said that in the deepest realm of death, God listens. The third one is from the pit, God brought up life. And I like this one. At the NIV say ebbing away. In the NLT version, it said that as my life was slipping away, remember God. When we are living in fear, I believe he is living in fear when he's inside fish belly. He remembered God. And as what Li Feng has read just now in verse 4, O Lord, you have driven me from your presence, yet I will look once more towards your holy temple. What we can see here is, in such a state of despair and distress, and in the lowest part of his life, I would say, for Jonah. And yet he can rejoice and approach God and say this prayer, rejoicing and praising God. Because as what we read again in these 9 verses, he still put his trust and faith in God because he knew that God will listen, God will answer, and God will revive him from the bad situation that he is in. Okay, so I hope that from here we are able to really draw application. We know that there are fear. In the last few days when I listened in, several of among us, we talk about the fear in our life. To Jonah, this is fear of the known. Okay, it is not fear of the unknown. He knew that the Ninevites were bad people. He knew that if he went there, he may be slaughtered by them. So he knew the known. That's why he has the fear. But yet, in such a situations, okay, he overcome his fear by saying this prayer. So I'm not saying that this is the prayer that is, like I said, the standard prayer, but it gives us an inclinations when we are in the same situation like Jonah, when we are fleeing in fear. Okay, we are able to draw prayer that Jonah is saying to God. Okay, so this is about Jonah. The second character is the famous Elijah. You do have read Elijah, okay? Last few days in the BW Jesus is in First King. He started to appear in First King chapter 17. Again, a very interesting story. When Elijah was introduced into the picture, immediately we can see God's power and miracles through Elijah. Okay, there's no time to go through it. You can read yourself in First Kings chapter 17. We talk about the widow's jar and flood, the jar of flood and oil that never run dry. We talk about how he revived the widow's son who has passed away. And then in the chapter 18, we will see the so-called the drawn down between him and the Baal prophets, where the burnt offering, okay? And then we talk about the revival, because when the people, when they saw, okay, God is on Elijah's side, okay, they worship God. Then we witness the rain after 3.5 years of drought. So this is again the background of Elijah. He was literally teleported in, and we witness the miracles of God through him. At the end of chapter 18, if you look at chapter 18, the last verse is 46. He went ahead of Ahab to Jezreel. I'll talk about that later on. In chapter 19, when he heard that Jezebel wanted to kill him, he ran for his life. Now again, I did some research and just want to find out how far did Elijah run. From Jezreel, he ran to Judah and then to Beersheba. In today's distance, that is about 90 miles. Then another day, he ran into the wilderness. Okay, we don't know how far. Then the angel of God appeared and fed him. Then another 40 days and night, he ran to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is significant because this is where God appeared to Moses. So some people calculated he could have ran 500 miles within that 40 plus days. Now, when you talk about flee for life, okay, Elijah literally, fled for his life. And in chapter 19, verse 4, okay, this is what most people will refer to when we talk about depressions. Okay, Elijah asked God to end his life. Okay, so it's a sign of self-pity, a sign of fatigue, and sign of depression. When we talk about fear, okay, most people will refer to Elijah running away. He's fearful that he will be killed. But I look at it as another perspective. Okay, some Bible scholars also look at it that in fact Elijah, he was frustrated. He is fearful. At the same time, he is frustrated. Because he said earlier part in chapter 19, 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 4, he said that I am no better than my ancestors. Why did he say that? Okay. In the last verse of chapter 18, he ran back to Jezreel ahead of Ahab because he wanted to give Ahab a last chance to turn away from worshipping Baal. But it didn't happen. So it wasn't really Jezebel's threat. Yes, it did contribute some, but it is really the disappointment on Elijah that the evil still persists in that land. It is his fear of failure to wipe out the Baal worshippers. So Elijah's fear, as I said, okay, it is basically his fear of failure, and he's frustrated. And it really, reminds me a lot of people of God in today's so-called situations that they are into, very, very successful ministry. They are doing a lot of good work. They are doing a lot of follow-up and ministry, but yet sometimes when they see that the fruit is so hard to come to bear fruit, they see that the harvest, is so difficult. Sometimes this fear or these frustrations will set in. And we know that, this fear of failure, okay, really sometimes will stop a person from moving on in the ministry. How did God reply to Elijah? Of course, God spoke to him in a very small whisper. God's instruction was very simple. First one, he has to return. He has to face his own fear. He has to face his own disappointment. Number two, God will raise up others. Okay, it's in verse 15 to verse 16. Okay, the last of the when he say raise, God's asking to raise up, three persons, anoint three persons, and the last person is of course Elisha, who will succeed Elijah. And God also replied, He has preserved 7,000 faithful ones. So, in a very simple manner, God was telling Elijah, do not fear, because there are still faithful ones remaining in the land, worshiping God together like Elijah. So, in a sense, I would say the fear of Elijah was dispelled, I would say, immediately when God revealed his plan to Elijah. What can we learn from these two? We talk about today's situations. We talk about every day the new COVID-19 cases is 800 and above every day. And what we can learn from these two persons, so-called two godly persons, is fleeing from fear. Actually, it's very, very common reactions. As Pastor Simi said the last few days, feeling discouraged, losing a hope is normal in part of Christian life. So we flee, we run away from fear. To me, it is a very common reaction. And God allowed us to complain to Him. Okay, I remember a couple of years back, somebody also preached on the pulpit that yes, God does listen to our complaint, because both Jonah and Elijah complained to God. Jonah complained, I knew you're going to save them, so that's why I ran away in the first place. Elijah complained, I have done so many things, and yet they are still Baal worshippers. So God allows us to complain. And thirdly, listen to wisdom voice from God. It could be from God directly, or God will send his messenger, some godly man and woman beside us. Listen to the wisdom voice. And fourthly, trust that God has a bigger plan. Because in both cases, God opened both Jonah and Elijah's eye to see that he has a bigger plan. The fifth one, I think it is really a personal choice. It is a personal choice that if we want to continue to live in fear, or in what I say here, darkness, which is for Jonah is inside, remain inside the fish belly, or like Elijah continue to remain in the wilderness. It is really a personal choice, because having said everything, it is really the choice that we need to make ourselves, whether we want to break away from our fear. I just want to bring out this is a comparison chart. I'm not sure whether you can see well. Okay, there are some similarities between these two persons. Okay, both are anointed by God. Both are on the run due to fear. Jonah wanted to run away because he's running away from God. He wanted to, he doesn't want to go to Nineveh. And Elijah, he's running away because, to be, to be honest, he wants to save his own life because Jezebel said she's going to kill him. Jonah is what we call very self-centered. Okay, he doesn't want his enemy to be saved. Elijah, okay, as what we read, sometimes he is fearful, sometimes he's anxiety. He has anxiety. And Jonah, of course, he regretted and he asked to be thrown overboard and he sulked to God. Same thing like Elijah, okay, he sulked. But the common thread between these two, because of these two, they brought salvation to non-believers. And before that, God spoke to both of them when they are in distress. And because of God's intervention and God's revelation, they witness God's power, and they also witness God's mercy, because God preserved the lives of those who deserve a second chance, as in the case of Jonah. And God preserved the lives of the righteous one, 7,000 of them in the case of Elijah. I want to end today's sharing, okay, coming back to our own country, coming back now to our current situations. You may or may not have read this. I gave you a few seconds to read this news. Okay, I also put the link. This news also appeared in other newspapers, including Bernama. Okay, you can Google it. It was 21st of October. It was in the news. Okay. What I want to highlight to everyone here is since March 25th, 1 week after MCO, the Health Ministry's mental health and psychological support services, okay, have received a lot of calls. And 50%, okay, the second part, 50% require emotional support and counseling for stress, anxiety, anger, and depressions. And among the reasons, if you read down further, the reasons are job loss, lack of income, relationship problems, fear of being infected. Why I want to bring out this piece of news? This is what is real in our country. Many people, close to 40,000 of Malaysians, they are living in fear. That is the reality. And sometimes when we, in situation like this, we can do lunchtime devotions, we can read from the Bible, we can quote from the Bible, we can draw application from the Bible. But we are living in the world where many people are suffering and crying out for help. The only way that they know is just calling the helpline. But can we, as the body of Christ, take time to pray for those people that are in need in such situations? They could even be Christians, we do not know. As many people say that in this COVID-19 situation, okay, Christians should not be staying in the ivory tower, because the world needs love and care and help. And we, being the ambassador of Christ, we are at the forefront. We need to reach out and minister to many of them who are now living in fear. Okay, And I just pray that, later on, if we have time, we can just pray over this together. To me, it is saddened me, okay, that, when people are in such a situations, okay, they have nowhere to turn to, and they can only call the helpline.